At some point, were you approached by some individuals that were looking to purchase some marijuana?
Yes.
And who were those individuals?
Khalil and Litarius.
Okay. And is that the same two that you identified in the photographs, States Exhibit 12 and 13?
Yes.
All right. And at that time, where did you know to get marijuana?
Ty.
All right. So what did you do when those individuals were seeking to find some marijuana?
I called a friend of mine for they can go over and buy weed.
All right. And do you know how you were able to make that phone call?
I do not remember.
Did you ever, before this night, sent anybody over there like this to purchase marijuana from Mr. Donaldson?
I don't believe so, no.
All right, I want to turn now to a trial that we're covering live here on Court TV, and that was Malcolm Bell, the first witness called by the state in Florida v. Everett. Bell was a friend of the victim, Tysaiah Donaldson, and arranged for the defendant, Kaliyha Everett, and Letarius Matai to buy marijuana from Donaldson on the day he was shot and killed. Now, the second witness to be called was Donaldson's girlfriend, Angelise Major. She was a witness to the shooting and described the shooter's clothing during her direct examination.
Two boys walked up. One had a white shirt, khaki pants, I don't remember what kind of shoes, and a black beanie. The other one had on a white shirt and blue jeans. I don't remember if he had on slides or tennis shoes.
Okay. And the person that you described with like the black beanie, the white shirt, and the khaki pants, who is that going to be?
The shooter.
Okay. And is that the person that you said had kind of stood up and stood there the whole time that you guys were talking?
Yes.
But on cross-examination, the defense confronted Major about giving police a different description of the shooter's clothing at the time. Take a listen.
You were asked to look at photographs of some clothing here this morning, and you identified the clothing that you say that the shooter was wearing, including some khaki pants.
Yes.
Is that correct? When you spoke with the police officers that night, you described the shooter as wearing black jeans, right?
Yes, I did.
And you described the shooter as having a teardrop tattoo on his face?
It looked like to be a tattoo on his face, yes.
All right, let's bring in Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae to help us sift through this. Now, Julia, the defense has really, in my estimation, made great use of cross, and they seem to be focusing on the idea of the defendant, certain characteristics, what he might have been wearing. This has been a real area of focus for them.
It has been. These eyewitnesses and other witnesses who were party to everything that went on that day in December of 2015, they're all consistent in the fact that they identified the defendant, Kaliyha Everett, as the shooter that evening. But there are other parts of their story that there are some inconsistencies in, and that has been brought out by the defense attorneys through that cross-examination. The clothing that the defendant was wearing is a huge part of it compared to what they said the shooter was wearing. You heard the girlfriend of the victim saying that he was wearing khaki pants today on the stand, but in a detective's testimony later on in the day, he said that she initially told him that the shooter was wearing dark colored pants or jeans. So there's that discrepancy that, of course, the defense is trying to hang everything on to say that the defendant was not the shooter.
All right, let's bring back in our think tank, criminal defense attorney and law professor at Emory University, Molly Palmer, criminal defense attorney Renee Hill, and family law attorney Jennifer Brandt. Jennifer, I'll start with you. How much of a problem is this for the prosecution? I thought, again, as I said, I thought the defense did a pretty good job of raising some of these issues for this jury.
Well, I think it raises the issue of doubt, of course, because if the witnesses, eyewitnesses who were right there at the time, can't be consistent in their description of the shooter, then, was he the right person? I think that's the question that we all have. So I do think the defense is doing a great job of bringing some questions into mind. But we do also know that eyewitness testimony is not always so reliable. And obviously, if this was the victim's girlfriend, she was traumatized at these events, I'm sure, and may not have been able to be sure about what the person was wearing. But, is she credible enough to be believed that she knows it was certainly, the defendant here? That's the question we all have and waiting to see.
Yeah, no, you Renee Hill, I'm sure you've been involved in these types of situations many times where the ID becomes a problem, becomes the question for the defense and for the prosecution. Here you have, I think some person said he might have had a do-rag on, another person said he had a certain type of haircut. There's the issue of the tattoo on the face. Enough of these put together, does that become an issue for the prosecution?
Absolutely, because these are the things that the defense is going to argue to a jury. Look at the inconsistencies here. Look at the discrepancies in the person that was described as being the shooter in this case. And if it doesn't match to the defendant, then the prosecution is going to have a big problem. Defense can argue that they have the wrong person. This is a misidentification. And, just like Jennifer said, the girlfriend is very upset. She's traumatized at this point. So what was she really looking at? Was she looking at the gun? Was she looking at her boyfriend? Where was she looking at the time shots were fired? So all of that are issues that defense can pick apart, and present to the jury so that they are showing them reasonable doubt in this case.
Now, before this whole thing happened, there was maybe a 20-minute conversation, and on cross-examination, Angelise Major gave some interesting testimony about the person she called the non-shooter. So let's take a listen to what she said.
You don't believe that the person you describe as the non-shooter, the guy with the dreads in his hair, you don't believe that he was surprised at all when the gun was pulled?
No, I don't believe he was surprised. He had a surprised look on his face, though.
But you don't think that that was genuine?
No.
All right, let me bring back in legal correspondent Julia Janae here. Julia, she's talking about Notarius Matei, and he has not been charged in this case. As a matter of fact, he's a big part of the prosecution's case. I still am perplexed by that fact.
He was never charged, and he did take the stand today as witness number 5. He is the person who was there with the defendant, according to his testimony, and he was the one who was there for the agreement to go and have this pot deal with the victim. He was there describing their interaction, the conversation that led up to it, saying that the victim was going to weigh it for them and they were going to discuss the money. But he also talked to police very early on and cooperated with them in the sense that he actually identified and pointed out the defendant, Kaliyha Everett, in a photo lineup, and he wrote on that photo for police that this is the one he saw aim the gun. But he also admits that he fled the scene along with the defendant and that the defendant changed clothes at his home. That's where these khaki pants versus dark blue jeans comes in, because those clothes stayed at his home and were collected by police, and the DNA of the defendant was found on those khaki-like pants.
Molly Palmer, is it that simple that he just happened to cooperate, get there first, so he's ultimately the one that doesn't get charged? Usually in these cases, they'll still throw some charges on him to put a little pressure. Maybe they didn't need it in this case.
Yeah, I find it unusual as well, Michael. I'm really surprised that he's not charged. And I think this actually lends a little bit of a credibility issue to the prosecution, right? Is the jury wondering this exact same thing and now looking at the case, their case in chief, and saying, you know what, I don't buy a lot of this. So I think strategically, whatever they did in making that decision might kind of turn around and work against them in the long run.
What do you think about this, Renee? Notarius, I mean, he's someone that I didn't necessarily buy on the stand. It looked like he was coached. He didn't quite understand all of the answers. What was your take on Notarius Matei?
Yeah, he doesn't come across as a very credible witness for the prosecution. And I think that the jurors are going to be questioning his testimony. Everything here, the fact that he wasn't charged. I mean, like we're saying, did he hightail it down to the police station to get there first and say, listen, I'm going to tell you everything. Don't charge me. I'll be your witness. All of these things. And it's very, very strange that there were no charges brought against him at all. Sure, he can claim that he didn't know what was going to take place in terms of a shooting, but he was still present. He was still there. There are things that the prosecution could have charged him with, or at least to keep their thumb on him a little bit, to have him available to testify. Now, they do still have him available to testify, but the defense is going to be able to argue a lot of things based upon that. You didn't want to get charged, right, Mr. Mateus? So you're going to say what the prosecution wants you to say. in order for you to walk away from this. And that's going to be a problem for the prosecution.
Yeah, a case that seems straightforward perhaps isn't as straightforward as it seems.